Hello and welcome to the Briefing Room. I'm your host, Bill Froehlich from WTCM Radio News. It's our weekly discussion with the journalists covering Northern Michigan about the stories that we're covering here in Northern Michigan. And we've got quite the full table this week of some great guests joining me. Starting on my left, Pat Sullivan from Northern Express. Welcome back, Pat.
Thanks, Bill.
Sara Simnitch from 9 and 10 News and Fox 32.
Thank you.
And Peter Payette from Interlochen Public Radio. Good
Hi,
to
Bill.
see you again as well. Lots going on this week. Big news week nationwide. Of course, Wednesday night we had that explosion in Texas. Monday the marathon bombings in Boston, and I guess let's just start there because that was obviously the big news of the week nationwide. But some local, not implications really, but some local ways that sometimes we try to address those stories. And Sarah, I know you were a part of doing some of that at 9 and 10.
Yeah, a lot of local. Whenever we can localize a story to, kind of get out there how it impacts Northern Michigan, it helps. Or, and I think a lot of it, we did team coverage of it, everything from a national package to right down to, talking to police and emergency responders for, are you prepared if something like this were to ever happen? Even talked to the Bayshore Marathon organizers about, that's a big race in our area. Is there any concern now? That, and then maybe I think one of our reporters talked to a psychologist, like the psychological impact of a big tragedy like that on the people there and on the country and things like that. So,
One of the interesting aspects, I guess, from a news gathering perspective was there was some moment at which, after the bombings, our newsroom, your newsroom, obviously, and I don't know how or if you guys addressed it there, but we started making the calls and the searches for who from Northern Michigan is in Boston.
Mm-hmm.
What runners do we have? What family members do we have? And so that was a big challenge to try to get some local connection to the actual scene.
We had, I think, already, but for our 6 o'clock newscast, I think a phone interview with somebody there in Traverse City, or it was our nighttime, maybe 11 o'clock news. But and then we found actually some more from Manistee and Ludington, and did a story once they returned home. A couple teachers, local teachers that were there, and to be able to tell us what's going on and what it feels like to be there during something like that.
Pat, let me ask you what happens at Northern Express. I know as a weekly publication, it may be different than radio and TV trying to update something every hour. But even just as journalists watching that day unfold, what's it like in the Northern Express building?
We don't really, we don't cover that kind of thing. We don't try to make a localized story about it or anything. And I don't know at what threshold we would kind of jump on a story like that. But we turn on the radio and listen to the coverage on the radio, and we look at Facebook and look at online coverage, and just like anybody else.
Sure. Peter, how about you guys at IPR?
We don't.
Was the other?
We have so much coverage coming from NPR that we just let that go.
The other thing I wanted, I guess, your perspectives on or your take on was there seems to be, I think as there was after Newtown, this backlash against the media and or the police agencies, what they're reporting, when they're reporting it, what they're releasing and not releasing. And then this so-called erroneous reporting of was there an arrest or was there not an arrest, and whose fault is it for saying there was an arrest? Anybody want to just chime in on that?
I think part of the frustration that people have with that is that what makes terrorism effective is that it instills fear and it gets everybody into a frenzy. And what the mechanism for that is it requires the media to put it on a stage and present it like that. If they didn't, 3 people died and that's a tragedy, but I guarantee you in every state 3 people died in a car crash that day. Mm-hmm. And there's it's tough to put things like that into perspective, but I think that people are frustrated on that level to some degree.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's coverage?
Not because there's coverage, but because
it's in a sense not sensationalized, but I understand what he's saying. It's you have to cover it, but the fact the minute you use the word terrorist attack, that automatically is well, where else who else is in danger and what else is going on across the country. And, they were finding these bombs all over the place, shutting down libraries and whatever else. And I think that just instills fear. Like Pat said, I think it's, just a natural human nature thing.
Were people using, our coverage, NPR is pretty meticulous about what words they use to cover these events. You've not heard the word terrorism all over this in our coverage. Terrorism has a specific term. It has to be multiple people and, have a certain agenda.
I think it was called, pretty early on it was officially called a terrorist
act. Yeah, the president called it that.
Whether it was domestic or foreign, because it was a bomb placed, in a place to cause maximum damage and cause maximum fear.
But if it's a single actor doing this for no particular reason, then that would still be considered terrorism.
Where does the blame lie, if we want to use that word, about this reporting on Wednesday of whether or not there was an arrest or not an arrest? Is that the media agency, the journalist behind the story? Is that, it seemed like each of these stories that came out was attached to some source within law enforcement. So is there somebody speaking out of turn?
I'm thinking that's probably.
Or is there really a rogue journalist out there that's confusing the world, deliberately? That's just, because that's, I think, the perception when you hear about people complaining about this, or if you're on Facebook and people are, well, why can't the media get it right?
Mm-hmm. I think
people make mistakes. I'm sure even those people complaining make mistakes once in a while. We had that incident in Traverse City where there was a guy who was in a bathroom in a plane.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to remember how this went, but it got a lot of attention. And it turned out he was just in the bathroom for a while. And somebody reported, I think a reporter out of the Traverse City area reported that he had been arrested. I think this has been a little while, but I think this is what happened.
Was this one from a few months ago?
No, it was more like a year. It was a year or maybe a couple years ago at this point. And that piece of news that was erroneous went insane. And then, as I remember, we were trying to correct it, on our Twitter feed, and you can't get nearly the correction of the incorrect fact doesn't have nearly the traction out there in the digital realm that an exciting piece of information that's wrong does.
Well, maybe that has to do with sharing or retweeting, there was an arrest versus, I guess that was wrong, and moving on with your life.
Yeah, absolutely.
Any other thoughts on just how journalists have to go with what they've got?
I don't know. I don't cover terrorist acts very much, so I don't know what goes on. But clearly, it seems as though there would be other stories. Well, I don't know what information they have access to. Part of it is that you're trying to report something, and what do you know? And you don't know anything. I don't know how many times I had to hear on our broadcast, how many bags do you see at a marathon? At a marathon, there's a lot of duffel bags. That fact just kept being said over and over, because in the first 24 hours, there was, what else was there to say? These bombs went off. You can report the injuries and the casualties, and so everyone's grasping for information, and these poor cable networks have to have news constantly on, and so the hours just tick by, and they're just saying the same things over and over. So a new fact flies out there, or a supposed fact, and it's just so. I guess I would criticize the whole culture of the news industry and the way it operates and the expectations people have. For it was probably a lot different when news came on at 6 and you watched an hour of news, and that was your news for the day, right? And then maybe you read the paper in the morning. And so people had time to check things, and it wasn't this insane race to constantly be chattering about something.
Yeah.
I don't know.
One other, breakout from that whole story, and just to touch on briefly the Labor Day Bridge Walk, Mackinac Bridge Walk, they're talking about now adding extra security to that too. And, you guys talked to local emergency responders. I talked to a couple of them yesterday, and it was hard for me because I said, I really don't want to make this. What if this happens in Traverse City?
Right, it's hard to do
story.
that
Because I don't want to sensationalize it and over dramatize it, but they are clearly making efforts to address some of those concerns, especially at a large gathering like the Bridge Walk, where thousands of people will be crossing the bridge. Let's move on a little bit to a story that Pat Sullivan is working on for this week, or that came out this week in the Northern Express. Pat, a story on mental health courts. Tell me a little bit about what's going on with that.
The story that I did this week was about mental health court in the 86th District Court in Grand Traverse County. It's been around for a couple of years, and it's an innovative way to take offenders who, like people who commit misdemeanors or minor felonies that can be pled down to misdemeanors, people who they think maybe if we work with these people in a creative way and address some of their mental problems and some of their substance abuse problems, maybe they don't have to spend a year in jail. Maybe it can be cheaper and it can be a better result for them.
And is this Mike Haley's?
It started with Mike Haley, but Mike Stepka is the judge who's presiding over this for the last, I think, year and a half or 2 years.
Was it originally drug and alcohol focused?
The original,
sobriety court.
Yeah,
sobriety
about 10
court,
years ago they started with sobriety court, and then in 2009, kind of modeled on that, but as a separate court, they started the mental health court, and I think there were 9 or 10 courts in the state that were picked as pilot courts to try this out, and Traverse City was one of them.
Anything that jumped out at you in that story, any piece that you said, I've got to make sure I get that in the story, or anything that surprised you about how the court works?
Well, the challenge in doing a story like that is that basically, it's open court, so I could have gone in there and I could have used anybody's name. I mean, it's open court. I could go look at the court files, and I could listen to what they say in court, and I could, tell their story and reveal their identity and all of that. But the judge didn't want me to do that, and that wasn't the kind of story that I was working on. I mean, these people are at a point where they've pled guilty. They've been through the initial stages of their trouble, and they've gotten to a point where they're almost in therapy now. They're still in court, but it's more like therapy, and that was kind of the point of my story. So the challenge was, how do you tell this story when you don't have
following so-and-so's life
journey. Joe Smith is whoever, this happened to them, and and then you take their picture and you interview them. Like, the people didn't really want to talk to me, and so taking a picture was a challenge. Like, I set it up so that there was one, they had to ask for a volunteer, and one guy volunteered to have the back of his head shot in court. And then I figured what I needed to do to tell a story was it lasts for about an hour, and so it takes place on Wednesdays at 2 or 2:30, and so I just went for 4 weeks in a row and sat there and took notes and kind of picked up on these strands of stories going on with the people who I saw week after week. And what I found interesting was that you could clearly see this guy over here, you can tell this guy's doing well and making improvements, and he's going one way, and then this lady over here is
struggling. Yeah.
And, she's.
What's the threshold to be deemed? How do I put this? Who qualifies to be in this court as opposed to the standard justice system?
There are different. You can look at that in different ways. If you're looking at who goes to sobriety court versus who goes to mental health court, because you'll find in both instances you've got some of the same issues. It's often the people in mental health court also have drug abuse or alcohol abuse issues, but it's which is the dominant, or based on the diagnosis. They go here or they go there. Then, in order to qualify to get into this court, you can't have had a previous violent felony, you can't have had a previous felony drug charge, and there were a few other specific things that could disqualify you from this. Because it's a good deal if you look at it from the sense that you get to do this, kind of go to court therapy once a week, and then a bunch of other meetings. It's a good deal compared to jail. But on the other hand, let's say you're looking at like maybe a 3-week jail stay or something. This can last up to 2 years. It's intensive, and maybe you've got 5 meetings a week, and you've got to, get these forms to probation officers, and you've got to, be at therapy and be responsive, and so you got to put a lot of work into it. So it wouldn't be for everybody.
Does the judge have the power to require them to take prescription meds?
I don't know. That's a good question.
Because I had heard that was one of the problems with Michigan law, is that the judge doesn't have that power.
Okay.
And that's often, one of the key elements is making somebody take medication.
That's an interesting question, and to be honest, it never even occurred to me to ask that question.
You mentioned too before we sat down at the table that the Record Eagle had a similar story.
Same weekend, yeah.
Same weekend. So how did that unfold?
I thought that people must have thought because it seems like just a random news feature, mental health court. It's been around for 3 years, and then we both have this story on the same day, or just basically, And the way that happened, it was they were doing an assessment of the mental health court through the state, like the state court administrator's office, and they said to all the courts, one of your missions is to get out there and promote the court and educate the public about what's going on. So that led Judge Stepka to write kind of a press release, and it was a very informative, very well written press release. But I think I got it, and Ann Stanton at the Record Eagle got it, and I think we both looked at it and we thought, there's probably a story here. Mm-hmm. And we got it at the same time, and we both made appointments to meet Judge Stepka. And when I met him, he was like, I just want to let you know, I sent this out. I'll send it out to the Record Eagle, and I think they're working on a story, and I'm going to tell them that So we both knew that we were each working on a story, and so we both also, it took us both of us like 5 weeks to do it, but it happened to come out on the same day.
Let's take a break here on the briefing room. We've got lots more to talk about when we come back right after this.
What is Up North TV?
It's TV that you do.
You pick the topic.
You write the script. You run the camera.
You edit the video.
It's your vision.
Your perspective.
Your story.
Commercial free.
Free speech.
What is Up North TV?
It's me.
It's you.
It's all of us.
View us on Analog 97.
Cable digital too.
Digital 992.
UpNorthMedia.org.
Welcome back to the briefing room. I'm Bill Froehlich from WTCM Radio, joined this week by Pat Sullivan from Northern Express, Sara Simnitch from 9 and 10 and Fox 32, and Peter Payette from Interlochen Public Radio. Guys, thanks again for joining us. Weather seems to be a really big topic again, at least around the water cooler, if not the newspaper and the airwaves. We got another round of crazy weather this weekend coming our way. Flooding. Sara, you guys obviously, every newscast kind of leads with weather, but there's a lot of legitimate concern out there. We got flood warnings in effect for a lot of counties.
Yesterday, there are a lot of flood warnings, and that's prompted one of our reporters yesterday to go to Newaygo County, who they haven't had the best luck in the past, and so they're watching their back. She talked to a few homeowners who are already preparing, and anybody really that's by a river like that, they're just really scared.
Is Newaygo between Cadillac and Grand Rapids? Is that down that way?
Down as south and east of Cadillac?
Yeah.
And the one last night that came out was Everett at Osceola County expected to reach flood stage by sometime tonight or early tomorrow. Could be 2 feet over flood stage by Friday or Saturday. The one that I guess I'm kind of curious to keep an eye on is the Boardman River in Traverse City, not because it's been declared, a flood warning zone necessarily, but even this past weekend they already had some flooding issues, and so the residents, at least the ones that spoke out publicly to the local media, are saying, well, this is because of the dam.
Yeah. And Tom O'Hare was saying, our meteorologist, that it's basically you get all this water and it's not going into the ground, it's going into the local rivers and streams, thus they're overflowing. And when you have a problem like that, it lends itself to automatically assume that it's flooding again because of the dam,
Or the lack of a dam.
Yeah.
But do we really get flooding? I mean, those rivers that you mentioned, those are south. I mean, my understanding has been, and I don't know if this is correct, but the rivers up kind of in the Grand Traverse region don't really flood because the soil's so sandy that we don't, that the rivers down by Everett that are reaching flood stage, that's because there's a lot more clay in the top layer of the earth, and that's why those just can't drain out. But rivers like the Boardman can, it's soaked into the hillsides, and it spreads out more quickly, and that's why we don't. I mean, I've lived here for
That's a really good
13
question.
years now. I mean, we get flooding. It's not that the streams don't kind of overflow, but I've never seen serious flooding. Yeah,
that's a good question. I don't know the reason for that, but yeah, I guess I can't think of a time when we've had a lot of problems in the Grand Traverse area compared to many other places.
Yeah, that's why I was real interested. I saw Glenn's report in the Record Eagle about how the Boardman was coming up to levels that people had not seen. Although when there's so much contention around that, I sometimes have trouble believing people saying, we've never seen this.
Well,
maybe they...
And we had several news tips last week too, last Thursday or Friday or whatever, or last Wednesday I believe it was, about a few people emailing us or calling in and saying, there's sewage floating by and there's, all of this. And so of course, as a reporter, you make some phone calls on it, and the sheriff hadn't heard anything about it. Emergency management hadn't heard anything about it.
And I talked to emergency management too, and I said, what's going on at the Boardman? And I saw the video too that you guys had, so it's obvious that the water level was higher. I mean, people weren't just making it up. But emergency management told me this is kind of at the normal. It's not anything out of the ordinary in terms of high water levels. This happens this time of year when the snowpack melts.
For the Boardman.
For the Boardman. Yeah. Now, will that change over the next 3 days? Very, very possible with all the rain we're getting. Let's talk about another water story real briefly here. And Peter, you've been covering something going on in Lake Huron with the fish species up there.
The fish species.
Yes.
Right. So, I reported that we hear a lot of bad news about the Great Lakes and Asian carp and quagga mussels and all this stuff. Well, for a couple of years now, researchers in Lake Huron have been seeing fish populations of native fish coming back at levels, in some places, levels they've never seen. One scientist told me that they do these trawls in the fall to see what, and by those, they throw a net in and trawl with it, and they do it at various places in the lake, and then they estimate the population, the total amount of fish in the lake. And he said in some of their nets, they've seen one particular kind of fish, chub. They've seen more of those fish than they've ever had in any of their records, which go back 40 years. So I thought it was interesting because mostly what we hear is bad news, and I think the scientists that have kind of a long view of the lakes, their view is that things aren't as bad as it often seems because of the media, it's not that there aren't problems, but in particular, the native fish are actually more resilient over time. And so now in Lake Huron, they're seeing all these fish coming back, and they're seeing the lake kind of returning more to the state that it had been in before it went through all these gyrations. And because 3 years ago they were using, scientists in scientific papers were using the word collapse to describe what was going on with the food web there.
I guess it's remarkable that it's such a fast turnaround then, 3 years later.
It's kind of surprising, yeah. And and the sort of the social implication of it, the one lesson that you can draw is, because what happened in Lake Huron was the alewives disappeared. And so, the one lesson is when the alewives go, things get a lot better, because the alewives are not a native fish. But the problem with that is the salmon like to eat the alewives. And so in Lake Michigan, there are still alewives, and they manage the lake to try and keep them there. They put in fewer salmon because they don't want to lose those alewives. But in all these other fish that are not doing well in Lake Michigan, and they can't connect the alewives to all of them, but to some of them. They're sort of Michigan is put in a situation where we're keeping the lakes in an artificial state, or at least Lake Michigan, because the salmon fishery is so popular. And but what they're seeing in Lake Huron now is that when the alewives are gone, all these everything kind of comes back to life.
So we've got other implications down the road then for what, tourism and any other number of
It's true,
future
yeah,
stories.
and
really.
that should be said because all those little towns in Lake Huron suffered immensely when the because charter fishing goes away by and large. I mean, people will pay to go fish for walleye in a charter boat, and they'll go fish for lake trout, but not like salmon. I mean, salmon is the big, exciting sport fish. So all that business now comes to the shores of Lake Michigan, and those towns. One researcher calculated like $1 million of economic activity per year per town in little towns, places like Rockport.
Mm-hmm.
We've got just a couple minutes left, and I wanted to hit on a couple other things going on in Peter's neck of the woods because you've got Interlochen big anniversary coming up, and you just real briefly hit on for us what the whole team there is working on. You guys are working on a couple of special reports.
Right. So we're doing a series of stories. We're looking back at the last 50 years and trying to identify major events, decisions, ideas that have shaped the region. So, for instance, one piece we're working on is connecting the birth of the wine industry to the food movement. And showing that it was really the reason we have all these restaurants here now is because a few people started to grow grapes going back 30, 40 years. And we even, for one of our stories, I think Eric Patterson, who's at the Cook's House, he said to us, I wouldn't have come here because he was looking for somewhere to locate and start a restaurant. He was a chef in Las Vegas and had already received some recognition. Won, I think, a pretty prestigious award, and he told us, if it wasn't for the wineries, I wouldn't have come here to do this. And so, kind of trying to trace things back to, to see, what the effects have been. Speaking of the salmon, another one of the pieces is the connection between the salmon and the tribes today. Because if you go back to when the salmon were first put in Lake Michigan, the tribes, Peshabi Town was kind of a ghost town. The tribes were really dwindling, but when the salmon came in, then the issue of treaty fishing rights heated up, and the fishermen that asserted their rights, then that led to federal recognition because the court cases came out of that. Then the tribes were recognized, and once they were recognized, then they opened casinos, and so we're here today, and the tribes are very prominent and influential, and own the Grand Traverse Resort, and all these things.
When do those stories start airing?
So I think they will be in kind of the back part of late June, early July.
Okay.
And it'll all be on our website as part of our celebration of the 50th year.
Fabulous. 1 minute to go, so we've got a lot of questions to throw at Peter because you're taking some time off from Interlochen Public Radio and expanding your own horizons. Tell us where you're going.
I am. Well, you might call it a sabbatical, but it's technically not a sabbatical. It's a leave of absence from my job. And so my family is very fortunate to be able to spend the summer in California, in San Francisco, and I'm going to do a little groundwork on a book. And we're going to hang out in the San Francisco Bay Area.
One question for Peter. What do we want to know about this time off?
Where are you staying? Are you renting a house?
I have a good friend who lives in San Francisco who's giving us his home for the summer.
Wow.
Yeah.
Right.
Have fun. It's a good friend.
Yeah, exactly.
No tough questions for him?
No.
We don't want to know the nitty-gritty?
The minute's up.
Carry on.
All right. Well, I want to thank everybody for joining us on the briefing room this week, and thanks to Peter. Have a lovely summer off.
Thank you.
We'll hopefully get you back in
the
fall. Sara Simnitch and Pat Sullivan, thank you guys for coming in as well. I'm Bill Froehlich, and we appreciate you tuning in. We'll see you again next week.